wants all of it and go into the kitchen? Yeah.
Oh man, I had gotten some candy, some Hawaiian candy to share today. I have no idea where it is.
Did you eat all of it?
You know, I had insomnia last night, so maybe I sleepwalked and I ate all the Hawaiian candy.
That's dangerous. Is it? Do you want me to ask the people on here? Is good? Okay, should we get started? Bismillah. Bismillah, walhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalam ala rasulillah, wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa barak wa sallam. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. So we're going to start Hadith 17 in this 40 Hadith collection. Imam Nawawi, rahmatullah. It's going to go into another topic, but still rooted in his section on ethics and character. So people want to pull it up. And we're going to really quickly talk about the narrator of this hadith, just while people pull it up, because we haven't met this companion yet in terms of the narrators of the hadith. So this is narrated by a Sahaba by the name of Shaddad ibn Aus radiallahu an. He has the kunya of Abu Ya'la because one of his children is named Ya'la. And Shaddad ibn Aus, his father is related to Hassan ibn Thabit. So his father is Aus ibn Thabit. So Hassan ibn Thabit, people know Hassan ibn Thabit. Who's Hassan ibn Thabit? The Prophet's poet, yeah. So he's a well-known companion of the Messenger of God. And so this is his nephew. His father, Aus ibn Thabit, is one of the people who takes Shahada with Musab ibn Umair when Musab ibn Umair is sent to Medina. So people who come to the Wednesday Sirah class that we do, this is one of the things we talked about like 3 weeks ago. Musab ibn Umair was sent with that delegation from Yathrib, who had come to the Prophet in the 11th year of Revelation, and they came as a dozen people for Hajj that year. And once the Prophet sent them back with Musab ibn Umair to teach them, when they came back in the 12th year, this is where there was now 75 of them who came. And up until that point, Musab ibn Umair had probably gotten about 200 to 300 people who became Muslim in Yathrib. It was in Medina at that time. And so one of those early people who converted was the father of this person, Shaddad ibn Aus, radiallahu an. He is somebody who is buried in Palestine. If you go there, you can see his grave even today, Shaddad ibn Aus. Under the caliphate of Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu an, he was sent to be a governor for the people there. There's different hadith that Shaddad ibn Aus narrates on behalf of the Prophet alayhi salam, but you want to kind of understand the point in which he is being introduced to the religion, right? He's not in this early phase in the Meccan experience, but he's coming in a Medinese experience. And he's somebody who's known for being kind of in his eloquence and articulation, but he's the nephew of the Prophet's poet. He spends time with the Prophet ﷺ in this early stage where the establishment of Medina now doesn't have the same challenges as Mecca. There's an instance where Shaddad ibn Aus is seen as being a little bit down, and the Prophet kind of engages him and then gives him glad tidings. of the kind of acquisition of Beit al-Maqdis back to the people of this ummah. And then it's under the caliphate of Umar ibn al-Khattab that he's sent to actually be a person who governs over the people there, and he's still buried there. There's not like so much that we kind of need to go into in terms of who he is, but just to give a brief overview of Shaddad ibn Aus and what it is that he kind of is bringing. In terms of hadith, he narrates about 50 hadith from the Prophet ﷺ. And we can extrapolate just from what we've said about him that he's a person of the Ansar. He has like family that has very kind of noteworthy biographies in terms of their relationship to the Prophet ﷺ. And he's the one that's narrating this hadith. So can somebody read the hadith? We're just starting it off today. The Arabic, the English, you can read either or. Hadith number 17 of the 40 hadith of Imam Nawawi. Yeah, go ahead.
عن أبي يعلى شداد بن أوس رضي الله عنه عن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال: إن الله كتب الإحسان على كل شيء، فإذا قتلتم فأحسنوا القتلة، وإذا ذبحتم فأحسنوا الذبحة، وليحد أحدكم شفرته وليرح ذبيحته. رواه مسلم.
Somebody read the English? Yeah, read. Go ahead.
Verily, Allah has prescribed His Son in all things. Thus, if you kill, kill well. If you slaughter, slaughter well. Let each one of you sharpen his blade, and let him spare suffering to the enemy he slaughters.
Great. So, the crux of this hadith is in its initial part. Inna Allah kataba al-ihsan ala kulli shay. That indeed Allah has prescribed this thing of ihsan on everything. And just to give an overview of the hadith so that people know what it is that fundamentally we're talking about, the two examples that are given we'll delve into in a little bit. And over the course of the coming week, we'll talk about this. We're going to use this hadith to also talk about kind of levels of ihsan. So there's a level of ihsan that's towards Allah. There's a level of ihsan that's towards humanity. And then there's a level of ihsan that's towards the rest of creation, inclusive of animals, etc. So we'll talk about just how our tradition teaches us to honor the rights of animals, because there's a lot that goes into that and a lot of instances where the Prophet speaks about this. But understanding the gist of the hadith on a whole, it's not talking to us only about ihsan in the two examples it uses to illustrate, but it's saying to a population that had a tendency to not even honor the rights of animals in any way or the rights of people in any way, right? This was a population that comes out of female infanticide. There's mutilation and all kinds of like atrocious ways that death, murder, killing takes place. And if you remember, when we talked about persecution of people in the Meccan period of Islam in the Sirah class on Wednesday, they're like doing terrible things to people, right? Putting them under the Arabian sun and throwing boulders at Bilal radiallahu anhu's chest. Khabab ibn Arat is made to stand, lay down bareback on a bed of flaming coals. There's sahabiyat who were put in iron armor and left to stay there to be tortured as the sun essentially is like cooking them. Do you know what I mean? So these people had disregard, in the highest sense of disregard, in these ways. And when people are thinking about the kind of implementation of things like capital punishments or warfare and conflict, like you look at the world today and how fundamentally grotesque it has learned to desanctify human life, let alone kind of mass production of animals and mindlessness in terms of how it is that we engage in that as a practice as well. The hadith is saying, even in these instances, you're supposed to engage in ihsan. So if you're supposed to engage in ihsan towards the individual that there is some form of capital punishment towards, or the animal you're going to consume to eat, then how do you treat with ihsan the animal that you ride on, the animal that you take milk from? If you're going to do this to a person that you engage in this moment where most people could care less about some of this, then how do you think you're treating humans like your spouse or your children or your coworkers or your teachers or your students? You see what I mean? So let's understand that we'll kind of extrapolate from the hadith on a whole, but it's telling us this thing of ihsan is applicable to everybody, even in these instances where people don't even think twice, let alone the ones that you should have some more presence in. You see what I mean? So the key word in this hadith is this word ihsan. And we want to break down this first part of the hadith. In Allah katab al-ihsan ala kulli shay, that indeed Allah prescribes ihsan on every single thing. And we looked at ihsan when we looked at the second hadith in this collection, the hadith Jibra'il, where the angel comes and teaches the religion. And there's a part of the hadith that says, Akhbirni an al-ihsan, that give me the khabar, what is ihsan? And the Prophet says, An ta'budullaha ka'annaka tarah, that you worship Allah as if you see Him. فَإِن لَمْ تَكُنْ تَرَاهُ فَإِنَّهُ يَرَاكَ, that although you cannot see Him, He sees you. Right? And that's kind of a base of understanding of that first level of ihsan that we're going to get back to in maybe like 20 minutes. That is ihsan with Allah, right? Distinct from ihsan with humans, distinct from ihsan with other animals in creation, other created beings. Do you know? But we want to have a baseline definition here of what this thing is, because it can then qualitatively get left out of an understanding. And that definition is going to be important that we'll get to in a minute. But the first thing that I want us to think about here is that this is the first value that we're being introduced to that is being defined as a baseline defining quality in every single matter that one interjects their involvement in the course of their day. Do you see what I mean? The hadith is saying that in every single thing you do, from like the way you sit right now, to the way you will stand in prayer, to when you eat, to when you sleep, to your work life, your school life, every relationship, how you treat others, how you treat yourself, how it is you engage in all of your choices and decisions, the presence of this thing of ihsan is meant to be in every single thing. So, as an overarching value in ethic, it's not something that is only present situationally, but it's present in every matter that one engages in. Do you see what I'm saying? Like patience, mercy, compassion, truthfulness, integrity, honesty. Like we could go down a list of all kinds of values and virtues, all kinds of ethics, but the mode in which this value is being introduced to us, in Allah katab al-ihsan ala kulli shay, that indeed ihsan is prescribed in every matter, on every issue, in everything. It creates for us a few different ways that we can understand its presence and how we process its presence in our existence. Does that make sense? So I'd like for us to do, just to kind of get going a little bit, what does that say to you when you hear it in this mode? Right? Because this hadith could have said anything. It could have said, Allah has written like truthfulness for you in every matter. Allah has written rahmah, compassion for you in every matter. Allah has prescribed for you integrity. Allah has prescribed for you like any value that you can understand to exist in a prism of values. But the Prophet chose to highlight this value And it's not in a vacuum. It's extrapolated from Quran, and we'll look at that in a bit. But I'd like for us to frame the importance of this and what it is that we can understand just from this idea that this thing of ihsan, it's supposed to be in everything that we do. So I'd like for us to do, just to kind of get talking a bit, people are starting to trickle in more. What does that bring up for you? This thing of ihsan is written in every affair, in every matter. There is some element of this thing of ihsan. Let's turn to the person next to us, maybe exchange some names. What does that bring up for you when you hear that? And then we'll talk about it a bit, and then we'll discuss as a whole. But go ahead. Okay, so what are we talking about? Just so we can kind of get people's brains going. What are we discussing?
That if we approach everything with a sense of ihsan, then essentially everything becomes an act of worship, and we're able to be intentional and have a better sense of gratitude, whether it's washing the dishes or just walking, right? Where we're like, oh wow, I'm doing this sacred act. I'm capable of doing it, and able to be able. I'm sorry, being able to have gratitude for it.
Great. Other thoughts? Like, what does it mean that this thing of ihsan is in everything? What can I then kind of deduce from that for myself? Yeah.
Do you mind giving sort of a summary of when you talk about ihsan in terms of like the line, the rectangle, and the plane, and the depth?
No. Stop telling me what to do. No, well, we're going to talk about what ihsan is more in a little bit, but we want to like individually build a relationship with the concept and understand like how it really resonates in our day to day and how it can bring it in. Do you get what I mean? Does anybody have anything else they want to add in, like what they talked about? Because it's like everything can be turned into an act of worship. What else do we discuss? Yeah.
I was telling Luna about how I took this one Islamic art class that went into urban planning and just how masjids were designed. And that particular class was on a women's masjid. Am I speaking now? Is on a women's masjid, and so they talked about how like even just designing the dome of this masjid required an immense amount of time because it wasn't just architectural or artistic. It was more like even every tile and panel came together to kind of numerically evoke a certain name of Allah. And so because this was a women's masjid, it kind of evokes some of the more feminine names of Allah, so like Ar-Rahman, and I think Al-Wadud, and even the colors were chosen based off of just evoking the names of Allah, and as a result of bringing this all together, when a woman entered the space, like it felt like it just curated this sense of awe and Rahman and beauty. And the class also went into not just masjids, but like how even architecturally urban landscapes of Muslim cities were built to evoke meaning and beauty in everything. So like even streets were planned in such a way to create community and interaction so that people would bump into each other before they head to the masjid. And so that sort of excellence in every single part of just urban planning results in a community oriented towards God. And that's what I was saying about.
Amazing. Yeah. It creates for us an opportunity. Go ahead. You want to say something?
It's after you.
No, please.
So in terms of the ihsan, depending on the subject matter, it changes a little bit. But for example, in salah, ihsan is that you pray salah as if you're what you call that you're watching like Allah's here, like Allah's you're seeing Allah, right? And that's the highest level in terms of salah. And then that's perfection in salah. So then if you take ihsan and you apply it to everything else, like for example studying, ihsan wouldn't be like I'm just gonna cram the exam right before. It's gonna be like, okay, I study properly before I take steps in which that I'll pass the exam like with due diligence. And that you take that principle and apply it to everything else in life. And that's what ihsan is that whatever you do it properly. You put full effort in and you reach that level of perfection. Right? It's impossible to reach perfection itself, but it is possible to reach a level of perfection in things what you do, and that's what ihsan is.
Yeah, jazakallah khair. So when you think about this, right, if the capacity for ihsan to exist in every affair that we engage in and all that we do is there, it's creating a metric of assessment for you to inventory at the end in your own reflection. Was that actually in what I did? Do you see what I mean? So the idea isn't always just about what's forthcoming, but to also then at the end of the day look back and say, was there ihsan in my actions, my choices, from what seems to be the most mundane and trivial to the most grandeur? The elements that go into this, you can see from bits and pieces of what you're saying, but we want to actually have steps that allow for us to think, well, how do I measure and assess ihsan in this relationship, in this friendship, in this job, in this task, in this prayer, in this fast, in this recitation? So, looking at the hadith itself as a mechanism for us to then take out sequentially steps to be able to understand, well, what goes into this in terms of ihsan? When you're talking about the slaughter of an animal, we're going to probably in a couple of weeks, as we wrap up this hadith, we'll talk about that process itself, right? And what goes into it so that we can understand like the mechanics and why it's important for us to actually have ihsan in our consumption and eating habits, right? May Allah make us people of consciousness. But using what you know in terms of just the example the Prophet uses, when you slaughter an animal, what's the first thing that happens? Huh? No, but sorry, let me reframe. I'm going to go to slaughter the animal. I haven't done the slaughter yet. So before I do anything in terms of the physical act of slaughtering, what happens first? Huh? You say Bismillah, Allahu Akbar. You make an intention, right? So a part of ihsan is rooted in intentionality, right? The idea that you can turn anything into an act of worship, but you are prefacing a mode of consciousness in this way. أن تعبد الله كأنك تراه فإن لم تكن تراه فإنه يراك. This is not done in a default setting, right? So to have a sense of real ikhlas in what I'm doing that enables me to go back and say, did I do that for the sake of Allah, or did I do that to satisfy my nafs? Do you know? Was I leading the prayer in order to say, look at how great the recitation is? Am I giving the dars? Do you know what I mean? Like, do I show up at the halakah? Do you see what I'm saying? This is why people like Sufyan al-Thawri, rahmallah, who is a well-known figure in our tradition, who got to a place where he actually had his own school of thought. This is how knowledgeable he was. His school of thought doesn't last, but it still was there. He says he wrestles with intention a lot. Do you know what I mean? It's the hardest thing to wrestle with, right? But bucket number one in the assessment of ihsan, like, did I do it for the right reason? You can have multiple intentions in an act. They can all be noble, but understanding that's prism number one, like in an assessment, right? Does that make sense? In the course now of the slaughtering of the animal, think about it in terms of like how the hadith is telling us what ihsan is. What is something after sincerity? It doesn't have to be like in any particular order, but what can you extrapolate from the hadith and what you know about the slaughtering process? Whether you've done it or not, or you like eat meat or not, like aside, just the actual process itself, what are we taught about it? And like, how do you then try to take metrics of assessment so it's not just purely abstract? I can actually say, was there ihsan in this thing? Do you see? So what else can we take from this? Yeah, from the hadith, sincerity is one bucket of ihsan. What else goes into it? If I'm assessing at the end of the day, yeah. Mercy? Okay. And so if we were to create a category of mercy, like when you're slaughtering an animal with mercy, what does that mean? How do you consider the animal when you're going to slaughter it? You hide the knife, right? So there's a hadith where a sahaba is going to slaughter an animal, and in front of the animal, like he is sharpening the blade. And the Prophet ﷺ says to this companion, like, are you going to kill this animal twice, right? Do you know? In this very hadith, what does it say about the blade? Why? What's the rest of the hadith say? Yeah, but what does it say? Just read it. What does it say? To spare suffering, right? There's mercy, right? So the act in and of itself is not just done, but you do it in the most considerate, ethical mode. You see what I mean? Right? So the method in which it's done is done with the ethics ascertained by not a moral relativism, but by what Allah and His Messenger are deeming to be the most important way or best way of doing it. Do you see what I'm saying? Does that make sense? Right? What else then can you take from that? Think about this animal now. You're going to slaughter the animal. It goes into another bucket. Aside from doing this in that way that is inwardly ethical, you also then have the mechanic of doing it outwardly ethical. Because I could take an animal's life, God forbid, in a way that's extremely grotesque. The mode in which we slaughter an animal has minimally, at the highest recommendation, 4 of the main arteries kind of severed in every kind of utilization of one of those arteries in a throat, right, in the jugular. And there's different opinions on minimally what has to happen of them, like do all 4, like is 1 sufficient, 2, 3, which ones? And we'll talk about that a little bit later in the meaning of this hadith. But there's a sense of what is good inwardly and outwardly. Do you see? Right? And it's not just I had good intentions. That's why I took a rock and I banged it on the head of the animal. It's not then correct in its form. The form has to be correct and the inward has to be correct. Does that make sense? Right? This is ihsan, like the outward and the inward. Do you see? And then the last bucket, just in the interest of time, is that you actually like fulfill the task. Do you know? So if I took the animal and I only cut a part of its throat, that's crazy. Do you see what I mean? That is like what torture is. Do you know? If you're going to start the slaughter, you got to finish the slaughter, right? The only merciful thing to do at that point is like finish the slaughter. You see what I mean? The sharpening of the blade ensures that you're not rubbing a dull knife against an animal's neck. Doing it out of sight, the sharpening, so you're not creating fear and anxiety in the animal. Doing it away from other animals so that you're not causing trauma to the other animals at a distance, so it doesn't hear like this animal also in this moment, right? Doing it the way the dhibha is done, it immediately severs cessation as quickly as possible in comparison to other things. But you have 4 metrics of assessment of ihsan embedded in this. 1, that I'm doing it for the right reason. 2, I'm doing it in the completion of the act. 3, it's done inwardly with as best of a sense of intent in pursuit of ethics as possible. And 4, the outward form is actually done as correctly as it can be. Does that make sense? And at the end of the day, when I'm assessing, I'm not engaged in just a theoretical abstract, was today a good day or not? But I look in the mode of engagement of all of my decisions. In Allah katab al-ihsan ala kulli shay, that indeed Allah has written ihsan on everything. So that means my metric of assessment of what I put into the world can be understood through the presence or absence of this thing. If it's on every single matter, then every single matter can at least be assessed through this thing being a part of it or not. And then if I'm doing something without ihsan, why am I doing it? What is the point of me being able to do it? And then you start to deepen in an understanding. Can I do the haram with ihsan? No, you cannot. Why would you want to have excellence in things that are prohibited to God? Right? Today, I put my son in his place really well. Abuse is haram. Have fear of Allah, regardless of what it is that you can get away with in this mode. And this is the other part that you want to understand in relation to the 2 examples that are being given. When you kill, kill well. When you slaughter, slaughter well. The animal you're slaughtering, or if you're in a place where you have capacity to take the life of another human being, which we talked about in the previous hadith in deep detail, right? The recipient of those 2 things are not ones that have power in accord with yours. You have power over them. The animal can't do anything when you're about to slaughter it. You have full freedom to choose how it is you engage one that has lesser power than you do. Do you see? And ihsan has to be the way you honor that power that's in your favor. It doesn't mean that you are suddenly white in a white society when you are not white. You are suddenly not who you are in an anti-Black society. So power and privilege in its full accord does not have to be afforded to you. But in certain dynamics, you still have more power over the one that you are exerting the power over. And then you go and you assess in those particulars, where is ihsan within these buckets of assessment? Was there sincerity? Can I, for the sake of Allah, slap my kid? Like, really? Do you know? Can I, for the sake of Allah, be racist? Arrogant? You could already weed out a bunch of stuff. And then the nature of it and this completion and the elevation beyond what is simply acceptable, but doing it inwardly and outwardly. I want to give you two examples quickly. When I went to the Rohingya camps after the border was open between Myanmar and Bangladesh, 2017 and 2018 is the two times I visited. And the first time I went was just a few days after they opened the border. So everything was still being established, infrastructure, etc. In this part of Bangladesh, there was already nothing. If any of you have ever been to the part of Bangladesh that's called Cox's Bazar, and we drove about 3 hours to the camps, not because it was far, but there was just a one-lane road that was not developed that took us from one town to the next. And I went 10 months later to kind of see the progress of some of the programs we were supporting, water wells and other facilities, etc. It's very different today than what it looked like in 2017. And these people, they lived through real hell. May Allah make it easy for them. There wasn't one refugee I met on either of my visits, nor refugees I've met from Myanmar, Rohingya. In Mecca, there's 300,000 Rohingya that live undocumented. In Malaysia, I sat with Rohingya that were undocumented that were there. In Chicago, there's large Rohingya communities, as well as in different parts of this country. May Allah make it easy for all of them. When I went to Bangladesh, there was 500,000 when I got there. There was close to 1 million by the time I left on trip number 1. All of them told me about loved ones that they had seen burned alive in front of their eyes. Entire villages lined up and soldiers just shot one after the next, point blank in their heads. Livestock and homes firebombed, all kinds of difficulties. When I came back 10 months later, one of the things that they had experienced was they were eating the same rice every day, every meal, 3 times a day. Islamic Relief USA was the organization I went to help on that project with, and they were the ones we were channeling funds through as a community. One of the things they did, the rice in Bangladesh is different from the rice in Myanmar. Does that make sense? Right? It's like eating basmati rice versus Uncle Ben's. Do you know? So if you've ever eaten basmati rice, it's very different from Uncle Ben's rice, right? And you can tell the difference. Do people get what I'm saying? So these guys, let's just say for illustrative purposes, they were used to eating Uncle Ben's rice. And when they got to Bangladesh, all they were given was basmati rice. What Islamic Relief did was not only sought to bring different things, but they replaced the basmati rice with Uncle Ben's rice. They didn't have to. If you've ever done relief work, you buy high quantities, high volume of product, so it costs little and you can disperse as much as you can. I saw refugees eating this rice that was the rice of their cultural heritage, and they just broke down in tears. Because it wasn't just the taste, but it reminded them that somebody actually thought about them a little bit differently. This is ihsan, right? We can't gauge the sincerity, may Allah accept from them and us. But why would somebody do this other than trying to seek the pleasure of the divine? 2, they got the task done. The food was there. They did it correct outwardly. They're not feeding them haram. And inwardly, like there's that compassion, that kindness, the ithar, the consideration. لا يؤمن أحدكم حتى يحب لأخيه ما يحب لنفسه. This is a hadith we looked at in deep detail. You will not have complete iman until you love for your brother what you love for yourself. It's just rice. If you think about it just as just rice. But then it's so much more than that if you actually give it the consideration of ihsan. Does that make sense? If you juxtapose this to relief efforts that took place in Haiti when there was severe need for global support in Haiti. I don't know if any of you are Haitian or not. Does anybody have a Haitian heritage or been to Haiti or visited Haiti? Great. So rice was not a big part of the Haitian diet, but rice was flooded into Haiti because there wasn't ihsan. And after the consumption of something foreign to the diet, many people in Haiti started to build illnesses relevant to the shift in their diet, as well as the overconsumption of something and the underconsumption of what they were used to. Does that make sense? How do you get to that place? The intention can be noble. They're still trying to help people in their time of need. The consideration has the absence of ihsan. We're not judging anybody, but it didn't take into consideration what the actual need was of the specific people on the ground. Do you get what I mean? Would anybody have faulted Islamic relief if they just gave them the basmati rice instead of the Uncle Ben's? No. They would have said, it's still great that you're helping people in their need. That's when ihsan really kicks in. You still do the right thing, even when you can get away with doing it the other way. Your motivation is not simply transactional. What do I get in return? I'm just doing right because it's the right thing to do. And usually the absence of ihsan comes from the centering of the self in an unhealthy way. Optimization for the self in the immediate is detrimental both to the self and the collective in the long term. But now just think about this. It doesn't even mean you have to hate on the people doing relief work in Haiti. They're trying to do what they're doing. Do you know? But between the two, which heart would you want to have? The one that thought about the refugee so deeply that even in a grain of rice, they were able to say, hey, maybe this will just hit a little different when they eat it. Do you get what I mean? Ihsan, it's what you want to have. Do you see what I'm saying? And then the validation that comes at the end of it, if I could sit here and tell you that Haitians had problems with their health because of the diet that was introduced, that was foreign to their existence, don't you think some of the people who were doing that work know that also? And then later on, they look back with regret. Man, I wish we had done it differently. Ihsan doesn't yield regret in the same way that other things can. Do you see what I mean? And so when you're assessing with a certain metric of assessment, how do I do right by someone based off of who they are and where they're coming from, even the animal that I'm going to slaughter? I can't just do it for the sake of doing it. If my stomach is the sole motivator, then that's what the motivator is. And I look back at the course of my actions, and this comes in the chapters that are now rooted in a section on character, because you want to aspire to have ihsan in everything. Inna Allah kataba al-ihsan ala kulli shay. That indeed Allah has prescribed ihsan on everything. So if you're going to kill, kill well. What does that even mean? Right? You're going to slaughter, then slaughter well. Sharpen the blade so the animal does not suffer. The messenger of God is taking a population that could care less about the daughters that they had that they buried alive? You think they're caring about the camels they're riding on? You think they're caring about the goats that they're going to eat? Do you know? But every single thing has a right over us. It's not meant to be inundating or burdensome. It's meant to be liberating and creating now an opportunity for me to say, I better have presence in this. And if there was not ihsan in what I did, at least in the reflection afterwards, I can engage in it so that tomorrow I could live better, even if I lived well today. But if I, God forbid, did not live well today, then I can have that much more of a reason to live better tomorrow. Do you see? But that thing of ihsan becomes the ingredient, the variable, and I start to build a relationship with it that isn't just rotely regurgitating words that I memorize, but I actualize them. And I see it as a principle that now has capacity to exist in every single affair of mine. Does that make sense? Okay, let's do this just for a couple of minutes, because I'm talking a lot. Let's turn to the persons next to us. What are you kind of bringing up? What's bringing up this conversation? What's it bringing up for you? What's kind of thoughts is it kind of cultivating? Let's talk about it for a bit, and then we'll come back and discuss. Go ahead.
No, not
Oh yeah, okay, wow. I'm literally like, you were already on. I'm literally like, oh my god. I go from
Okay, so what are we talking about? What's coming up for people so far? Yeah.
I think that something that we were talking about is this idea of like, because Islam is such a holistic religion and it permeates like every aspect of our lives, it's interesting to think about how, as obviously like as important as Iman is, it doesn't really make a difference unless there's an element of Ihsan and Ikhlas also, and this idea of like refining your character and making sure that you're constantly checking back in with your intention is as important to the religion as like the action of prayer and all the more kind of like logistic things that go into what kind of like holistically inform being a Muslim person. So I think that having the opportunity to think about how that affects everything and it's not just like a hat that you can take on and off is like an interesting mental practice.
Great. Yeah. Yeah.
Something Galai and I were reflecting on. One, we really like the phrase "Ihsan is doing it right, even when you can get away with doing it wrong." So we can put that on a shirt. The Imam Khalid.
I like your shirt. Where'd you get that?
It was a conference in school.
Oh, yeah?
Years ago. But another question is like, what is the role of knowledge here, right? Because you described 4 categories, one of which is outward, doing it, like completing it correctly, outwardly, right? But correctness implies a definition, right? And with salah, we have hadith that define how the Prophet prayed. You know, the example of like letting your bones come to rest. But does that exist for providing relief? Does that exist for how I sit? Does that exist for how I write? Does that exist for how I just sit like? If Allah prescribed ihsan on everything, then everything must have the definition of excellence.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about that in a bit. But that's the idea. It's going to be embodied in every realm of your life, you know? Like, and to have something that has capacity to be embodied in every realm of your life, there's got to be a basis to it. In a bit, we're going to look at a verse from Surah An-Nahl where ihsan is mentioned in a verse that we hear at Jummah a lot. Inna Allah ya'muru bil adl wal ihsan, right till the end of that verse. But some of this is going to be different. Do you know what I mean? The ihsan that I have to my son and my daughter is different from the ihsan I exert towards their grandmother, right? Ethics are going to be situational, minimally, like you want to do for others what they do for you, so to speak. But beyond that, you want to do like to the best of your capacity in certain ways. And that correctness, you can extrapolate a lot from our tradition. So somebody was to say to you, does Islam have something to say even about something as simple as like the way we sit? Like it does, you know? Like, does it tell us certain things about like writing, for example, or like this kind of like, yeah, there are guiding principles to a lot of different things. How we relate to them is going to vary from person to person. And then knowledge in of itself, it has 4 buckets of obligation, right? There's your fard ayn. Like you have to know how to pray your fajr. I can't pray your fajr. You can't pray mine. Uh, there is a foundational bucket of knowledge that we need to have in terms of just theology. You know, you have to have a basic understanding of creed. Um, it's not just all like rationally deciphered. If anything, like that's what lends itself towards a lot more problems in Iman because you have faith in something. And if you have faith in something that is purely rooted in rationalized understandings, sometimes like Akida doesn't work that way. Do you know? How can you rationally conjecture the ideas of two angels on your shoulders? Do you know what I mean? Like, how does that just kind of rationally kind of conclude on its own? Do you see what I'm saying? A third bucket is foundational knowledge of how you take care of your heart, like your inner self. And then a fourth is how Sharia applies to you in your given stage of life. So if you decide you want to be a doctor, you got to know what Islam says about being a doctor. I'm not a doctor. I don't have to know what Islam says about being a doctor, right? You want to be a dad, you want to be a husband, you want to be like whatever it is you're deciding to be. You choose to do these things, right? So if I choose to slaughter the animal, I have to know what Sharia says about slaughtering the animal. Do you get what I mean? Does that make sense? And if I'm going for Hajj, I just got to know how to do Hajj, right? I don't have to know how to do Hajj until I'm doing Hajj. Just like I don't have to know how to give zakat until I have to now give zakat. Do you see what I'm saying? But the obligations also have fluctuation from person to person, given like what I'm choosing to bring into my life. Does that make sense? Right? And if you say, is it a lot? Like, well, no, not really, because then you just have to learn it once, right? And then you know it. So, like, I just got to know what it means to be a doctor from an Islamic framework. Like, and then once I know it, like, I know it. Do you know what I mean? And then I can improve upon certain things in different ways, right? But the knowledge base is not going to change fundamentally. The slaughtering method is going to be the same, like, generally speaking. Does that make sense? Right? Yeah.
I was also thinking that, like, in the beginning, it was like, why wasn't the hadith like in Allah about like a taqwa or makhafatullah or like the fear of Allah or something like that and everything? And then as we gave all those examples and like you stood out to me, I thought about like it's not only to like fear Allah, but it's actually to try to be the best version or to do the thing at hand in the best possible way. And I thought about that as a much more beautiful invitation to. It's not like it's like the like it's not intimidating in the sense that it's not like think, oh, I just want to fear Allah and not do it the wrong way. It's like, no, how can I actually do it the best way I can? Which I think then can result in building civilizations the way Andy was talking about, like innovations in building mosques, or as I was thinking about like how they like how Muslims try to perfect math so they can figure out like the algebra for Iraq, for example, like that's how they did it. So I think it's a very beautiful thing to think about everything that you do in the sense that how can I please Allah with it versus just fear Him and just do the bare minimum.
Yeah, right? I mean, you have Muslims advancing in math as an act of worship, right? And if you can connect that, that's like a beautiful connection to make. Do you know that the kind of enhancement of these fields like becomes an act of worship? Do you see what I mean? And then when you think about the absence of ihsan, well, like what else is present then in my decision making? Do you know? What else is going into my choices? Because the choices are being chosen. So if it's not this thing, like what else is there? Do you know? And that's going to be an important thing for us to reflect upon also. But the idea is not to be inundated with it. It's just creating an opportunity as we have maturation and evolution in our own spiritual selves. Just doesn't assume immaturity as a default, right? Like everything can kind of grow and change. But one of the things that we can use as a reflection standpoint is where is the ihsan in what I'm doing? Do you know? Where is it? And how do I start to bring that into it day to day? The completion of the act in and of itself is just one bucket of it. I prayed my prayer. Now I want it to have like some nature of beauty to it. And beauty is not superficial beauty the way anti-black societies teach us about beauty, right? But beauty from the standpoint of the one who is the most beautiful, Azza wa Jal, and where do we start to bring some of that into play? Do you see what I mean? Ihsan does not coexist with arrogance. Ihsan does not coexist with racism. Ihsan does not coexist with bigotry. Do you know? And it's not about me assessing it in somebody else, right? Like, hey, man, there's no ihsan in what it is that you're doing. No, like you go and you take a look at yourself in the pursuit of having a growth mindset, right? I want to feel contentment. How do you think the guy feels that knows the Rohingya refugee is in tears eating a bowl of rice? And he had to like struggle and kill himself to like figure out a way to make this happen. But that's what makes it all worth it. Do you know? We have a sister in our community. Her name is Shazia Maiman. Every Eid, she's a pediatric nurse, and we run a toy drive with her organization, Caregiver, every Eid. It's going to be this Eid too. She takes in this year and last year she worked with the Sudanese American Physicians Association as well as Heal Palestine. So think about this idea. She started first with one hospital in New York, then grew it to multiple hospitals in New York, then grew it to multiple hospitals in the United States, and now is also sending toys to kids in Sudan and working with Heal Palestine to give it to kids who are coming here with severe medical needs, right? Why is she doing it? Do you know what I mean? Most of you are going to see the email. You're going to see like the toy drive. You're going to give toys. You're not going to know who the person is that organized it. Even right now, I told you her name. By the end of Maghrib, most of you are going to not know her name. Do you know? It's not because you're bad people. You have no reason to retain her name. Do you see what I'm saying? Right? Why is she growing it every year? Why is she thinking about new populations as they come in? Do you see what I mean? And how is she taking her skill set, the knowledge base she's acquiring? She sees sick kids all the time. Do you know? Right? And then bringing into it the element of ihsan. And her engagement of Ramadan is different through the same organization, volunteers bringing suhoor and iftar to families who are in hospitals with their children in Ramadan. Do you know? Would anybody say, I can't believe the Muslim nurse didn't do this thing? Do you know what I mean? And you think about how your fast is, and you get hangry and exhausted and whatever else. And she's a nurse. Her job is just serving other people all day to begin with and being on your feet all day to begin with. And then on top of that, you're figuring out ordering food and volunteer drop offs, and people don't show up, and other things got to get done still, right? What is it that you're motivated by? Like, hey, that kid is going to smile on the day of Eid. And even as they're wrestling with terminal illness, they're wrestling with the reality that they're going to be parents who outlive their children. They're wrestling with all of this. Somebody is thinking about me a little bit differently than the rest of the world that is too engrossed in their own needs to think about anybody else, right? Do you see what I'm saying? Can you imagine how beautiful the world would be if more of us actually willfully sought to practice ihsan in our life? Do you see what I mean? Would you ever see the bathrooms drenched with water on the day of Jummah? Would you like see like the mess that's there? Do you know? I saw a Muslim guy that was flushing toilets and cleaning them after other people use the bathroom. And I was like, why are you doing this? Right? I'm not a good person. I'm a bad person. And he said to me two things. One, like somebody else is going to come and use this, and they won't be able to use it if they're Muslim because they can't sit down on a dirty toilet. And then two, like look at the way we look. If we leave this bathroom and it looks like this, people are going to see us walk out and they're going to think we did this. And then it's going to make Islam look a certain way. And I was like, man, like that's crazy. Do you know? How do you start to see the world in that way and think in that way? Live bigger than the self, right? And it's hard because if you don't have it come to you, then it's hard for it to come back to somebody else. Does that make sense? Because I'm so bombarded with certain things that I don't know how to think about it in a different way. Does that make sense what I just said? Like if I'm not met with ihsan, then what is it that what is it then that I've been met with, and I can only give to somebody what it is that I have the ability to give to them? Does that make sense? So if people just gave me selfishness, then that's what it is that I'm going to have. I want us to look at 2 verses of the Quran. Sorry, I realize I'm just like word vomiting. I haven't slept in a few days, but I'm going to fix that, inshallah. If we can look at Surah Rahman, verse 60. And then after that, so Surah Rahman is Surah 55. So 55, 60. And then we're going to also look at Surah Nahl, which is the 16th chapter of the Quran. It's 90th verse. So 55, 60 and 1690. Let's look at 55, 60 first. Can somebody read it, the Arabic, the English? 55, 60.
Is there any reward for goodness except goodness?
Yeah, can we read the Arabic? You should like write this thing on the wall of every room in your house, right? It just perpetuates itself. Is the reward for ihsan anything other than ihsan? It's a self-perpetuating cycle. You bring some of that into someone's heart, they're going to just push it forward, inshallah, right? That's just how it goes. But also, like, this is what you got to understand as a spiritual principle. Our teachers tell us the punishment of the sin is the doing of the sin itself. Because you have to live with the reality of the transgression you engaged in. And at some point, your heart's going to wake up to, man, I did some dumb stuff to somebody. And then you have to live with that. Regret is a heavy thing to live with. May Allah make it easy for us. You know what I mean? In that same vein, like, you get to benefit from the goodness you put into the world. Do you know? You think that guy that said one day, hey, maybe we should get the rice that they're used to eating, that they haven't eaten in a long time for them? You think that guy is miserable? Like, I mean, really? Do you know what I mean? The story I like to tell people, some of you have heard it. I tell it whenever we go to Umrah and we go to Medina. I went with my father and my mother and my sister for Umrah, and all of our luggage got lost on this trip as soon as we landed. And this was at a time when my Arabic was a lot better. It's gotten pretty wonky these days because I speak English so much, and I don't really have anybody to talk to in Arabic. My dad cannot speak Arabic. There's a lot of cognates in Urdu. And so my father and my mother and my sister and I, after our suitcases were lost, my father went and tried to find the suitcases in the airport, spoke to some of the airport staff. We later found out that our suitcase was actually in the room right next door to where they were. They just didn't want to get up from their tea breaks. And the kind of things they were saying about my dad in Arabic, I won't repeat, but not something that anybody should say, let alone when you are in these blessed cities of Makkah al-Mukarramah and Madinah al-Munawwara. Allah forgive them and forgive all of us. We went for days without any clothes other than what we were wearing on our backs when we landed. My mother and my sister both had medicine in the suitcases that they didn't have. And every night my mother would wash the clothes we were wearing by hand. and then wring them out to dry, because we were under the impression that the next day would be when our suitcase would come, and the next day would be where our suitcase would come. And my father was just taking it in stride. And then the night before Jum'ah, my father said to me, I don't want to wear this outfit again. I want to wear something clean for the Jum'ah prayer. And he told me this late at night, and we tried our best to find a store that was open, and nothing was open. My father was very dejected. And we went to find some food, and we got to a place, and a waiter asked my father, why do you look so down? And all this frustration that my father had built up for days just released on this man. And the waiter said, Uncle, stay here. I'm going to bring you something to wear. And we waited and waited, and the minutes suddenly exceeded an hour. And as more time started to pass, my father, who was already in a broken state, the hope that this man gave him just made him fall harder. And he said to me, your mother and sister are waiting and are hungry. Let's go back to the hotel. And as we started to leave, the waiter started to yell at us from a distance, saying, Uncle, uncle, wait, wait. And then he got to us out of breath and said to my father, I'm so sorry it took me so long to bring this clothing to you. It took my wife more time than we thought to iron it for you. My dad couldn't stop crying. And every time we go to Medina, I tell people to make dua for this man whose name I don't even know, but he still brings tears to my eyes. Hal jaza al-ihsani illa al-ihsan? Is there a reward for ihsan anything other than ihsan? It can permeate like years of existence and still touch your heart, an actual sincere act of goodness. Do you think that man is an angry man that would do this? You think his wife is an angry person? In the middle of the night, he got her up to iron something. Do you know what I mean? And that's what it does when you have like real acts of goodness. The benefactor is you yourself more than anybody else. Do you know? And it doesn't take a lot to do something. It's just thinking about the other and thinking about the blockades that build up inside of me that make me feel as if I don't have anything to give back in the first place. This is the first tool that Shaitan will use to keep you from thinking bigger than yourself or just scratching at the bare minimum. This is why conversations are stupid. I'm saying is I love you, right? This is why conversations are stupid, where somebody says, is this just a sunnah? Is it just a recommendation, right? If you are coasting off of the obligations, then it's going to be the first step in leaving behind what is obligatory. And the obligatory is given to us for the purpose that we're not going to do what we need to do for ourselves on our own accord. Allah puts it into our path so that we do what He knows is best for us. Because if we rely on our own selves, we're not doing right by ourselves. And then the recommended is given to us as the means to increase in love. You want to do it, not because you have to do it. You do it because you want to do it. How can you want to do better for someone if you're not wanting to do the wanted acts, the recommended acts in our tradition? You see it as a spiritual exercise and you fight your nafs. Pray your sunnahs after you pray your Fard al-Maghrib today. Not for any other reason, because it will be a key ingredient for you to start thinking about, hey, I'm going to think a little bit more deeply about the recipient of the actions that I have. Do you see what I mean? Does that make sense? Right? Do you get what I'm saying? Hal jaza al-ihsani ila al-ihsan? Is the reward of ihsan anything other than ihsan? Memorize this, right? And don't just repeat it, but then say it to yourself as a guiding principle on how you want to live within your own capacities. Do you see what I mean? Does that make sense? You don't need someone's permission for you to ask, hey, can I do this or help you with this? Do you know what I mean? Right? And if they say no, that's okay. You still exert ihsan. It is a fundamental ingredient that you want to have exist in every realm of your life. Do you know? You don't treat people based off of who they are. You treat people based off of who it is that you are and who you want to be. Do you see? And then embedded in that is you got to do right by yourself too. And if the people around you don't practice ihsan, it's not meant to create a subtlety of arrogance, but you do right by them and you do right by yourself as well, and not just feigning that. So if you need healing inwardly, seek the healing that you need. Stop putting band-aids on things. Let's look at this verse from Surah An-Nahl, 1690. The 16th chapter, it's 90th verse. Can somebody read the Arabic, the English? Yeah, go ahead.
Indeed, Allah commands justice, grace, as well as generosity to close relatives. He forbids indecency, wickedness, and aggression. He instructs you, so perhaps you will be mindful.
Great. Can somebody read the Arabic? Yeah.
إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون.
So this verse is recited in a lot of Jummah khutub, contextually for you to understand why. Umar ibn Abdul Aziz is known as one of the great caliphs of Islam, right? Some would consider him to be the fifth of the Khulafa Rashidun because of who he was in his leadership. At the time that he instructed this verse be stated in the Jummah khutbah, there were many people who were utilizing the Jummah khutbah as a way to say things that were not good, including those who had dynastic tendencies that then had them speak poorly about companions of the Prophet. In particular, there were people who were saying not good things about Ali radiallahu an and his family. And so Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, he wanted to stop this, and he says to people, read this verse. Does that make sense? This verse is said to be the most comprehensive verse in the Quran. This is what Islam is about. And you want to spend time with it and reflect on it. In Allah ya'muru bil adl wal ihsan, that indeed Allah commands you to justice and this thing of ihsan. And one of the things I would encourage you to do, English, I think I said it in this dars, but maybe we said it in the Wednesday one, I don't know. But I would argue that English is becoming like an Islamic language because a lot of the things that are available in terms of text, in terms of content, etc. But there's certain words that you want to build a relationship with in their original form. You got to build a relationship with the word ihsan and other words similar that you don't translate because it loses the nuance in translation. So you don't want to say beauty, excellence, completedness, etc. It doesn't evoke what it actually means. Do you see? Here, Allah is commanding ihsan. This is what it says. When you have this hadith, in Allah katab al-ihsan ala kulli shay, then indeed Allah has written ihsan on everything. When you have this word, right, that here it says kataba, that usage in the Quran denotes obligation, right? Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu kutiba alaykumus siyam kama kutiba ala alladhina min qablikum la'allakum tattaqun. That, O people of Iman, may Allah make us amongst them, fasting was written for you as it was written for those who came before you, so that you might perhaps attain taqwa. May Allah make us from the muttaqeen. So that utilization, kutiba alaykumus siyam, is denoting obligation, not recommendation. We'll talk about this next week a little more, the nuance of it, like where it has a sense of obligation versus recommendation. Do you know? But just understand from Quran and Hadith, this thing of ihsan is important. Do you know? And not in the mode where you are saying to someone, you didn't do right by me. Where is your ihsan towards me? But just spend some time at the end of the day. and you're inventorying. Where was there ihsan in what it is that I'm engaging in the course of this day? You can visualize in the day that's forthcoming, right? We know that there are Monday and Thursday iftars during the academic year. I don't know what's going to happen in the summer, but we'll know that hopefully soon, inshallah, right? Like whether we do something here, we do it at the new space, a combination of both things, I don't know. But something, inshallah, will continue. But just think now about Maghrib is getting later, right? Today, Maghrib comes in after 8 o'clock, right? We have students who are typically here from September till May. But in the summer, those of you who are not students, we still stick around. You see what I mean? Who's going to help set up and break down the iftar? And you already see there's less people in that lounge area. So what ihsan would do, theoretically, is me at the end of the day, just thinking about all the stuff that's happening around me and saying, hey, you know what? There might be less people around who are typically here during the day because a lot of these students are going to go someplace else. So maybe the person who needs help is not going to have as much help in setting up the iftar. And Maghrib comes in at 8:05 today, and by its latest, is going to come in at 8:30 for Sunnis and closer to 9 for Shias. So I'm out of work well before that time. It's not like December when Maghrib's at 4 something. So I start to think a little bit more about, hey, maybe I should come and be the one that helps to get some stuff set up. Do you see what I mean? Right? I'm bringing ihsan into the thought process, the reflection, the contemplation. The food ain't just come from nowhere. The tomatoes don't come pre-cut, right? Right? We're not that fancy. Do you see? At the end of it, when all of it's done, and we've eaten in this room, and we're going to pray in here, somebody's got to still vacuum it. Somebody's got to make sure the chairs are not just stuck in a pile someplace, right? Where do I bring ihsan into the things I benefit from, let alone the things that people can take benefit from me on? Do you see what I mean? And I start to see how I factor in to the circumstance, not what is simply owed to me. This is where the story of the sheikh and the students again bears relevance. And you want to go back to verses of the Quran and hadith that you have learned, and you start to see them in relation to each other. Why do we get taught that Surah Al-Asr, if that's all you know, that's all you need of the Quran? Because you could take so much from that, man, if you just keep going back to it and using it as a prism of how you understand life. The sheikh says to his students, do you want to see the difference between the student of the externals, the student of fiqh, and the student of the internals, the student of the heart? And the students say yes. So he says to the students, when your peer comes in, your classmate, and gives you salam, don't return the salams. The giving of the salam is one of the few times that a recommended act has more ajr than an obligatory act, because the response to the salam is an obligation. The giving of the salam is a recommendation. So they listen to the sheikh. The student comes in, gives the salam, and everyone is silent. A second time he gives the salam and nobody responds. And a third time he gives the salam, and now when he is met with silence again, the student says to his classmates, don't you know it's obligatory upon you to return my greeting? The second student comes in, the student of the heart, and the sheikh says again, do not return the salams. And when the student comes and gives the salam, he's met with silence. A second time, the same thing. A third time, he gives the salam the same way his previous classmate did. But now, rather than getting frustrated, the student of the heart distinctly says, did I do something to upset you that you are not returning my greeting of peace? Do you see the difference? How do I fit into the situation? And look at the hadith in relation to each other. La taghdab, do not get angry. We talked about anger in a few different ways. Sometimes the most beautiful thing for you to do is to get upset. You should be getting angry at inequity and oppression and injustice. Where is the ihsan? When you are hearing about young black men getting killed in New York City correctional facilities, not years ago or months ago, but days ago. How do you not know that's a thing? Where is the ihsan? Do you see what I mean? And you start to apply it to the consumption selectively of certain news and information that is now not being done consciously, but unconsciously. And how shaitan can get you in different ways. إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي. Right? This verse is an important verse to build a relationship with. The other verse we looked at in Surah Rahman, also important in the context of what we're discussing, right? You want to start to build relationships with these verses practically, in actuality. You know what I mean? Because at the end of the day, we're going to still fundamentally be able to do whatever we want to do. We're just going to have to explain why we did it. And if ihsan is not present in your decisions, one of the things you want to reflect on, then what else is? I got to deal with this anytime I get in front of a camera, I get on a stage, I stand up at Jummah, and people tell me, like, you are like a good orator, right? I have to be able to recognize that that also creates a borderline challenge for me in relation to, why am I really doing this? Do I like it when you tell me I speak well? And is that the motivator? Am I in a place where the subtlety of it still has to be something that I have to wrestle with every day? Do you get what I mean? And recognizing and understanding that if it's about me feeding my ego in an unhealthy way, that is not the recipe for ihsan. Do you understand? And so where we can spend some time just in this first part, in Allah katab al-ihsan ala kulli shay. Indeed, Allah has prescribed this thing of ihsan on everything, right? It's not meant to be suffocating, but it's meant to be liberating. It's not meant to be something that holds us down, but something that's a guiding framework for how I experience my life in this world. Most of us do things for the purposes of consumption in a materialistic way. This decision is about making money. This decision is about the job I have. Both of those things is about making me a viable suitor in some way. All of it is rooted in a unwritten, uniterated pursuit of happiness. May Allah make us people of contentment. Ihsan is about the yield of contentment, not these other things that can go in any other direction. You know? Do you think that guy and his wife who ironed clothes for my older father, who they had never met in his life ever, and could have just disregarded the way every other person did, but they took the time to both notice and then act on what they saw? You think likely they're unhappy people? May Allah make them always happy the way they made my father happy. Do you see what I mean? So is the reward of ihsan anything other than ihsan? And if you can start living by Quran, not just reciting it, but living by it, like these verses, then they'll inform verses that say, don't eat pork, don't drink alcohol, don't gamble, no intoxicants, no zina. Why? Because you want to taste what only something like ihsan can actually offer to you. And in the remedying of things that came before, you want to then see, well, what would the muhsinin do here? A person of ihsan. They probably would apologize to the person that they hurt and not get away with it, because you don't fundamentally get away. You have the power dynamic in this world. Allah has the power dynamic in this world, really, and definitely in the next. You see what I mean? Does that make sense? We'll start to talk about it in more specifics, but creating a framework of what we're going to delve into over the next couple of weeks. Maghrib's going to come in 3 minutes. What I'd like for us to do, just turn to the persons next to us. What are some of the things we're taking away from tonight's conversation? Let's talk about that for a moment, and then we'll come back and discuss and call the adhan, inshallah, in a few minutes. But go ahead.
I feel like I should close that. Something that I was thinking about,
Okay, let's take a pause. Sorry, I thought Maghrib was at 8:05, but it's at 8:03. People want to put their chairs against the wall. If you're fasting, if you can there's dates on the table. Somebody just start like a plate for the date bits. And we're just asking people if you can wait till Maghrib is done to take food. Whether you were fasting or not, just feel free to stick around for iftar with us.